Good morning, Grassroots. I hope you guys are well today as you get going on your small groups this morning. I'm praying over you, hoping that you are preparing yourself for the truth, the reality that you are about to fellowship with the living God. He is with you, among you. You have his scriptures, his holy word in front of you, and the fellowship of believers around you. He is going to speak to you today through the scriptures. He's going to speak to you today through the insights of your fellow believers, and he's going to whisper to you words of encouragement and truth into your hearts if you have ears to hear. So I'm praying that you do today and that you are anxiously and eagerly awaiting this time. A few words of encouragement, and I've got some initial thoughts to give you for the scriptures today. First of all, a couple more weeks of Zoom like this, I think is probably ahead of us. None of us really like this situation. None of us really want to be on the other sides of screens from one another. In the matter of weeks or months, we will be back together again. And we are looking forward eagerly to that day. And so in the meantime, we need some continued resilience. We need some strength and endurance. I know you have it in you. I know this church has it in us, not just to make it through this time, but to be able to utilize this time so that we emerge stronger than we were before. And I believe that is already happening. That's already happened for our church. And I hope that you guys can someday share your stories with one another across these small groups. So in the meantime, here we are once again this week, jumping into John. We're in chapter 17. Last week we were in chapter 15. So as a reminder, chapters 13 through chapter 17 are Jesus' farewell speech in John. This is John's version of the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper, where he's giving his final farewell words to his disciples. So Jesus, as he does, closes off in prayer. And this really shouldn't surprise us. Jesus all along in his ministry in the book of John has been telling us about his closeness with the Father, that he and the Father are one, that everything that the Father wills, Jesus does. Everything that the Father says, Jesus says. Their hearts are in sync. They are locked in step with one another, and they are unified. The first chapter of John, from the very beginning, tells us that Jesus is the Word made flesh, that the Word was God and was with God in the beginning. So it shouldn't surprise us that after 4 chapters of teaching, Jesus moves somewhat seamlessly into praying. And I think one of the most undervalued aspects of Jesus in the church is his own devotion. His own devotion to God and the things that we can learn from his devotion. So the first thing I want to highlight here is this: Jesus is not afraid to pray in front of his disciples. Like I said, he moves seamlessly from speaking into praying. Jesus, at the end of chapter 16, he's teaching, like I said, I have overcome this world. He says, I have said all these things so that you might have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. That's Jesus' final words of encouragement before he moves into praying. And you can imagine this, without skipping a beat, he moves on from a lesson into praying. And for Jesus, this means that prayer is not just a second language that he's learned, but that prayer is his native language. It's his showing his disciples that he has no shame in teaching them, and he has no shame in talking to the Father in front of them. And I know many of us, before I start making this application into our own lives, we too should be comfortable praying in front of others. We too should have prayer as not just our second language, but our native language as Christians. Some of us might be saying, yeah, but that's Jesus, that's not us. And true, that is Jesus. But look at his final words of the prayer in the end of chapter 17. I will continue to make you known, Jesus says. Why? In order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. Pause with that. Take a moment to listen to it. God's love for Jesus, God's heavenly, powerful, perfect love, Jesus is praying into them, into the disciples. Jesus is asking God to give us the capacity to love like the Father. So Jesus was not just God, he was God, or a holy man, or a great teacher. He is an example for us in every way. And though some of us may dislike praying out loud, I know some of you do, the point is not to pressure you. Well, some of you really just need to jump in and start praying with other people out loud. But the point is not to pressure you, but to say here that our Christian life that we live must be a crash course in learning how to pray. We start with prayer perhaps as a second language, but as we are reborn into people not of the flesh, not of this world, not of this worldly system, but of the Spirit, the people redeemed and all of the aspects of our humanity redeemed into a new life, and that native language of that life is prayer. Well, what should we say then? Jesus, how should we pray? How should we go about trying to give words to the inner thoughts of our spirit? It's a good question. Well, Jesus here gives us 26 verses of some example of how to do it. Some of us know Jesus' shorter prayer, which we know as the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, and so forth. That's Jesus' most well-known prayer. But this is Jesus' sophomore praying. This is the next level, and there are also some patterns and lessons for us. First, we notice that Jesus prays two things for himself. First, that he would have intimacy with God. I in them and you in me. Jesus never lost intimacy with God. And that's the short version. You in me. And here he is praying for it. And that should surprise us and really shock us. He not only has an intimate relationship with God that's unbroken, but here he is tending to that very relationship and expressing to God that he wants to be intimate. You in me. Perhaps that needs just to be your simple prayer for the next little while as you experiment with this language of prayer. Father, you in me. How many of us spend any time asking God that we might have intimacy with him? It's a great prayer and a good place to start. Second, Jesus is praying for himself that his glory might be known. And this should shock us as well. Jesus is praying for himself, and he's praying that he might be glorified. Glorify your Son. Glorify me in your presence. He's praying for people to know how amazing he is. And this may all strike us as selfish or shocking, but here it is. Glory in this sense, we have to understand it if we're going to understand what Jesus is saying. Glory is not power. He's not praying for power. He's not praying for success. He's not praying for fame. That's not the kind of glory he's after. In this sense, glory can be understood as perhaps everything is as it is truly meant to be. The truth of the situation is shining forth clearly. It's a good definition of glory. Jesus is wanting people to know him truly and wanting to embrace him, to know that God sent him, to be confident that God sent him as his only Son. So this should put to rest, all of this should put to rest any qualms that you have in praying for yourself. Jesus prays for himself, and so should you. I would suggest that the prayers, God, let me be intimate with you, I and you, or God, let the world see me in truth for who I really am. Great prayers. I suggest you experiment with them and see what God does in them. So there's more here to this chapter than simply lessons about prayer, but I'll leave it to you and to your group to dig into the treasures and the truths of this chapter. And my prayer is with Jesus over you today, that you may be one as the Father and Jesus are one. I hope you have a great conversation and a clear sense of God in your midst today through your time of fellowship. All right, Grassrooters, I love you. Much love. We'll talk to you soon.